Our first guest tonight is an Oscar winner. Please welcome Nicolas Cage.
He once held an Oscar in his hands, and years later, faced bankruptcy notices on his doorstep. Hollywood didn't watch Nicolas Cage fall slowly. It watched him collapse in public. From the heights of artistic respect to a flood of desperate roles, his name became a punchline overnight. But what most people never understood was this. Those films weren't about greed, they were about survival. Behind the memes, the ridicule, and the madness lies a far darker truth, a story of control lost, pressure crushing in silence, and a man fighting to stay afloat while the world laughed. Rare photos and untold facts reveal why Nicolas Cage's story is far more disturbing and human than anyone realized. At the lowest point of his career, Nicolas Cage was no longer choosing roles. Roles were choosing him. By the early 2010s, lawsuits stacked up quietly. Tax debts reached millions. Properties were seized. Behind closed doors, the Oscar winner was racing against deadlines not written in scripts, but in legal documents. Every new contract meant another month of survival, another delay before collapse. What the public mocked as bad movies were, in reality, financial lifelines. Cage would move from one low-budget set to another with barely time to rest. Not chasing acclaim, not chasing art, just trying to stay above water. Rare behind-the-scenes photos from this period show a man almost unrecognizable, eyes hollow, posture heavy, carrying the quiet exhaustion of someone who knows his reputation is slipping away frame by frame. And yet, something darker lingered beneath the chaos. He never phoned in a performance. Even in films destined to be forgotten, Cage delivered intensity bordering on self-destruction, as if each role was a confession or a punishment. This wasn't a star who had stopped caring. This was a man who cared too much, trapped between pride and necessity, between artistic identity and financial reality. Hollywood laughed because it didn't know the truth. Nicolas Cage wasn't destroying his legacy. He was paying the price for it. Nicolas Cage was born in 1964 in Long Beach, California, into a family where art was not a dream. It was an expectation. His real surname carried weight. Coppola, a name already etched into Hollywood history, long before he ever stepped onto a set. From the outside, it looked like privilege. From the inside, it felt like a trap. Growing up, Cage watched success up close, not as fantasy, but as pressure. Family gatherings were filled with conversations about scripts, directors, reputation. Achievement wasn't celebrated. It was assumed. Failure, however, was never discussed, as if it wasn't allowed to exist. As a child, he was quiet, observant, inward-looking. He spent hours alone, absorbing films, comic books, and music, developing an imagination that leaned toward the extreme. Even then, he wasn't drawn to heroes who were clean or admirable. He was fascinated by characters who broke, who raged, who lost control. But the Coppola name followed him everywhere. Teachers knew it. Industry insiders whispered it. And long before he ever auditioned for a role, there was already a verdict waiting for him. Nepotism. That label terrified him. At a young age, he made a decision that would define his entire life. He abandoned his birth name. Choosing Cage was not an act of rebellion for publicity. It was an act of survival. Inspired by the Marvel character Luke Cage and the avant-garde composer John Cage, the name symbolized something radical. Freedom from lineage, freedom from expectation, freedom to fail on his own terms. But shedding the name did not erase the burden. It intensified it. Without the safety net of his family's legacy, Cage felt compelled to prove himself through excess. He didn't want to be good. He wanted to be undeniable. Subtlety felt dangerous. Restraint felt invisible. This hunger shaped his psychology early. He learned to equate worth with intensity, to equate recognition with risk. There was also instability beneath the surface. His parents' marriage ended in divorce when he was young, leaving emotional fractures that never fully healed. Home did not feel permanent. Security felt temporary. And from that uncertainty grew a deep, almost obsessive need to control his own narrative. Acting became more than a career choice. It became an identity anchor. By the time Cage entered drama school and began performing on stage, he wasn't chasing fame. He was chasing validation, proof that his voice mattered without inherited credibility. Ironically, This desperation to escape privilege planted the seeds of his future collapse. The same trait that drove him to artistic fearlessness would later drive him to financial recklessness. The same refusal to play safe would eventually leave him exposed. Before the cameras, before the Oscar, before the ridicule, the battle had already begun, not with Hollywood, but within himself. When Nicolas Cage stepped into acting, he did not arrive quietly. He arrived restless, already convinced that moderation was a form of disappearance. In the early 1980s, he enrolled at the Beverly Hills High School drama program and later trained at the UCLA School of Theater, Film, and Television. But formal education was only a fraction of his preparation. Cage studied performances obsessively, dissecting voices, physicality, and emotional extremes. He wasn't interested in realism alone. He wanted transformation, even distortion. His first screen appearances were small but revealing. In Fast Times at Ridgemont High, 1982, much of his role was cut, a humbling introduction to the industry's indifference. It was a warning many actors would heed. Cage ignored it. Instead, he leaned harder into risk. Early collaborations with directors like Francis Ford Coppola and Alan Parker gave him exposure, but also scrutiny. Every performance was examined for traces of favoritism. Any success was quietly attributed to his bloodline. Any failure confirmed suspicions. So Cage pushed himself further, louder, stranger, more volatile. Films like Valley Girl, 1983, and Birdie, 1984, reveal an actor willing to look unpolished, even uncomfortable on screen. He didn't chase charm. He chased emotional fracture. Audiences didn't always know how to react, but they noticed. Behind the scenes, Cage was already developing a personal philosophy of acting. He rejected the idea that performances should be restrained or believable in conventional sense. Life, he believed, was not subtle. Pain was not quiet. Madness was not neat. This belief made him hard to categorize. Casting directors didn't know where to place him. He wasn't a classic leading man. He wasn't a character actor either. He existed in between, a space Hollywood rarely knows how to market. Rejection followed. Roles slipped away. Projects stalled. There were moments when success seemed close, then vanished without explanation. But Cage interpreted every setback as confirmation that playing safe would destroy him faster than failure ever could. By the late 1980s, something shifted. Directors began to realize that his unpredictability wasn't a flaw. It was a weapon. With Raising Arizona, 1987, Cage finally found a role that matched his internal chaos. The performance was kinetic, absurd, emotionally raw, and unforgettable. Critics were divided. Audiences were not. He had presence. He had nerve. He had something dangerous. For the first time, Hollywood didn't just see a Coppola relative or an eccentric experiment. It saw an actor who could not be ignored. But attention came with expectation. And expectation would soon demand a price. By the early 1990s, Nicolas Cage no longer felt like an experiment. He felt inevitable. Hollywood had finally caught up to what directors on the margins already knew. His volatility was not a liability. It was a force. In a decade dominated by polished stars and predictable performances, Cage arrived as something raw and uncontainable. Then came Leaving Las Vegas. Released in 1995, the film was not designed to be a career-defining triumph. It was bleak, uncomfortable, and stripped of glamour. Cage played Ben Sanderson, a man drinking himself to death with full awareness of the end awaiting him. No redemption arc, no sentimentality, just slow, deliberate self-destruction. What Cage did with the role stunned the industry. He didn't perform addiction. He inhabited it. To prepare, he studied the physical mechanics of alcoholism, the tremors, the vacant stares, the moments of lucidity followed by collapse. The performance was fearless and deeply unsettling. Critics struggled to find language for it. Many called it too real. Others called it unforgettable. When the Academy Award arrived, Cage stood on the stage holding the Oscar for Best Actor. At just 31 years old, he had achieved what many actors spent a lifetime chasing. But the moment carried a dangerous message. The industry rewarded extremity, and Cage learned that lesson well. Almost immediately, Hollywood's biggest studios opened their doors. Big budgets followed. So did global fame. Films like The Rock, 1996, Con Air, 1997, and Face/Off, 1997 turned him into a box office juggernaut. He wasn't just respected anymore, he was profitable. The public image shifted fast. From tortured artist to action icon, from eccentric talent to reliable leading man. Money poured in, contracts ballooned. His face appeared everywhere, billboards, posters, magazine covers. Cage became a symbol of range, an actor who could win Oscars and carry blockbuster franchises. But something subtle began to fracture beneath the surface. The same intensity that made him brilliant also made him restless. Commercial success felt hollow compared to the emotional annihilation of leaving Las Vegas. To compensate, Cage began to chase stimulation elsewhere, not just in roles, but in life. Excess became normalization. Expensive purchases didn't feel indulgent. They felt necessary. Castles, rare artifacts, luxury homes. These weren't trophies. They were proof. Proof that he had arrived. Proof that he was no longer the boy escaping a famous last name. Hollywood, meanwhile, continued to feed the myth. Interviews framed him as a genius, a madman, a risk-taker beyond comprehension. Each label elevated him further away from restraint. No one asked whether the pace was sustainable. No one wanted him to slow down. And Cage didn't want to slow down either. Behind the scenes, the workload intensified. Scripts piled up. Decisions were made quickly, too quickly. The line between passion and compulsion blurred. What looked like control from the outside was already slipping internally. The Oscar had given him legitimacy. Fame had given him access. Money had given him illusion. But none of them gave him stability. And in the quiet moments, away from cameras, applause, and premieres, the same fear from childhood returned. The fear of becoming invisible. The fear that if he stopped moving, everything would collapse. So he kept moving, faster than anyone realized, toward a cliff no one was watching. By the late 2000s, Nicolas Cage's calendar no longer resembled a career plan. It looked like a countdown. Projects overlapped, sets blurred together. One low-budget film ended on a Friday. Another began on Monday. There was barely time to read scripts properly, let alone reconsider them. Contract arrived with urgency, and urgency had become his reality. Behind the scenes, the numbers were closing in. Tax obligations mounted quietly at first, then loudly. Millions owed, penalties accruing, assets leveraged against promises that assumed the work would never stop. The irony was brutal. The more Cage worked, the deeper he sank. Each paycheck disappeared into a system already bleeding. What the public saw, a flood of forgettable movies, masked the truth. These films were not chosen for love or ambition. They were chosen because they paid immediately. Hollywood didn't announce his fall. It monetized it. Producers understood the leverage. Cage still had name recognition. Posters could still sell. International markets still responded. So the offers kept coming. Faster, cheaper, riskier. The quality dropped. The schedules tightened. The safety nets vanished. Rare behind-the-scenes images from this era show a different man than the red carpet suggested. Wardrobe trailers doubling as bedrooms. Scripts marked with notes written between takes. Long hours, little rest. A performer operating on momentum rather than clarity. And yet, something strange persisted. Even as the material declined, Cage refused to disengage emotionally. He delivered performances with intensity that often dwarfed the films themselves. Critics called it unhinged. Audiences laughed. But what they were witnessing was not carelessness. It was compulsion. Cage didn't know how to perform halfway. He never had. That same extremity that won him an Oscar now worked against him. There was no switch to turn down. No mode for survival acting. Every role demanded full surrender. Even when the project didn't deserve it. Public perception hardened quickly. Headlines shifted tone. Late-night jokes followed. Nicolas Cage movie became shorthand for excess without restraint. The internet crystallized him into a meme, a caricature frozen mid-expression. The man behind the image vanished. Inside, the pressure intensified. Legal disputes surfaced. Advisors distanced themselves. Relationships strained under the weight of constant motion and constant anxiety. There was no pause to recalibrate, because pausing meant facing the numbers, and the numbers were terrifying. This was no longer a question of legacy. It was about staying solvent. Hollywood loves a rise. It tolerates a fall, but it feasts on desperation. And Nicolas Cage had become desperate in silence. He was still famous, still working, still visible, but control, real control, had slipped away. The collapse was no longer theoretical. It was structural, and the worst part was yet to come. The numbers eventually became public, and once they did, there was no hiding left. Court documents revealed staggering tax debts. Liens were filed. Properties once flaunted as trophies were suddenly listed for sale. Castles went on the market. Mansions emptied. The illusion of endless wealth collapsed into headlines that reduced decades of work to a single narrative: financial ruin. The internet reacted first, and without mercy. Screenshots replaced performances. Freeze frames replaced nuance. Nicolas Cage was no longer discussed as an actor, but as an expression, a face contorted into a joke, endlessly recycled, stripped of context. What made it crueler was that the caricature thrived precisely when he was most vulnerable. Each new meme erased another layer of complexity. Few asked why an Oscar winner would accept so many low-profile roles. Fewer still cared to know the answer. Behind the scenes, the pressure became relentless. Phone calls were no longer about creative opportunities, but obligations. Deadlines were financial. Decisions were legal. Cage had crossed a line where artistic refusal was no longer an option. Saying no didn't mean waiting for a better script. It meant risking foreclosure. So he said yes. Again and again. Some years. He appeared in more than 5 films. Many were rushed, underfunded, and forgotten almost immediately. But every contract pushed collapse 1 month further away. Survival became incremental. What the public mistook for arrogance was, in reality, endurance. There were moments when even Cage seemed aware of how far the narrative had drifted. In rare interviews, he acknowledged mistakes without self-pity. He spoke of responsibility, of misjudgment, of learning too late, that success without boundaries devours itself. Still, the ridicule persisted. Hollywood, sensing blood, adjusted its posture. Casting offers shrank in stature. Prestige vanished. Studios that once trusted him with tentpoles now treated him as a novelty, useful but replaceable. The same system that rewarded his extremity now punished him for it. Yet something quietly defied expectation. Despite exhaustion, despite humiliation, despite material that offered little reward, Cage never disengaged. He never sleepwalked through a performance. Even when scripts lacked depth, he injected urgency. Even when projects collapsed around him, he committed fully. It confused critics, it angered audiences, and it revealed a truth few want to confront. This was not an actor who had stopped caring. This was an actor who couldn't stop. Acting had become his last stable structure, the one place where intensity still made sense. Without it, there was nothing to anchor him. No pause, no silence, no room to confront the fallout of years lived at maximum velocity. By the mid-2010s, the damage was undeniable. His reputation was fractured. His finances were wounded. His public image felt irreversible. The industry moved on, faster and colder than before. From the outside, it looked like the end. But what no one noticed was this. In the absence of prestige, Nicolas Cage was slowly reclaiming something else. Control, not over money, not over perception, but over choice. And that shift, quiet, uncelebrated, misunderstood, would mark the most important turning point in his life. The fall didn't happen all at once. It happened in layers, quietly at first, then everywhere. By the time Nicolas Cage entered the mid-2010s, the industry had already made up its mind. The Oscar was no longer part of the conversation. Neither were the performances that once redefined risk. What remained was a simplified image, excess without discipline, intensity without filter. Hollywood didn't ask whether the narrative was fair. It asked whether it was convenient. Casting rooms grew colder. Scripts arrived thinner. Roles that once promised complexity now offered novelty. Cage's name still carried recognition, but not trust. He was no longer a leading man to be built around. He was a variable to be contained. Public ridicule intensified this shift. Online culture, powered by speed and repetition, flattened him into a symbol, a scream, a stare, a meme divorced from context. Performances designed to be unsettling were repackaged as jokes. The more exaggerated the expression, the louder the laughter. What disappeared was intention. Few remembered that Cage had always operated at the edges, that his choices were deliberate, even when they were flawed, that extremity had once been celebrated when it served prestige, and condemned when it no longer did. The contradiction was brutal. The same industry that rewarded him for going too far now punished him for never learning how to stop. Interviews during this period reveal a man aware of the disconnect, but unwilling to beg for re-entry. Cage did not publicly rage against the mockery. He didn't retreat into silence either. He continued working steadily, relentlessly, as if motion itself was an act of resistance. Critics often misunderstood this persistence. They read it as denial or ego, but what it truly reflected was survival instinct refined by years of pressure. Cage had learned that visibility, even negative, was preferable to disappearance. In Hollywood, absence is the only unforgivable sin. And yet, beneath the noise, something began to change. Stripped of expectations, Cage found himself free from a certain kind of judgment. No one expected greatness anymore. No one demanded Oscar speeches. The stakes had shifted from reputation to autonomy. He began gravitating toward projects that didn't ask him to be likable, or marketable, or restrained. Independent films, genre pieces, stories that leaned into discomfort rather than avoiding it. The performances sharpened, not louder, but more focused. Without the burden of proving his worth, Cage experimented again. He leaned into abstraction, silence, stillness. Directors who understood his instincts gave him space instead of constraints. The work stopped trying to please everyone and started speaking to a smaller, more attentive audience. Hollywood barely noticed at first, but something important had happened. The man who once chased validation through volume was learning how to exist without applause. The same intensity remained, but it was no longer fueled by panic. It was fueled by choice. This wasn't a comeback. Not yet. It was something quieter, a recalibration, a recognition that being misunderstood was not the same as being finished. And in that realization, Nicolas Cage found a kind of freedom that fame had never given him. What followed was not a comeback tour. There were no grand announcements, no carefully scripted apologies, no attempts to rewrite the narrative. Nicolas Cage did not return to Hollywood asking to be forgiven. He returned asking to be left alone. For the first time in years, his choices were no longer dictated by urgency. As debts were gradually addressed and the pace of obligation eased, something unfamiliar emerged. Space. Not comfort, not security. Just enough room to decide. And Cage chose differently. He gravitated toward projects that didn't require consensus. Films that operated on the margins. Stories that trusted atmosphere over approval. Directors who didn't ask him to dial it down, but to aim it precisely. The shift was subtle but unmistakable. In smaller productions, the absence of spectacle worked in his favor. Without massive crews or marketing pressure, Cage recalibrated his intensity. He discovered restraint not as limitation, but as contrast. Silence became as powerful as explosion. Stillness carried weight. Critics who had written him off began to hesitate. Some performances were described not as eccentric, but controlled, not excessive, but intentional. The same traits once ridiculed were being reevaluated, this time without expectation. Importantly, Cage never framed this phase as redemption. He didn't speak of lessons learned in neat conclusions. He acknowledged mistakes plainly, without drama. I didn't need to be saved, he implied through action. I needed to keep working. That distinction mattered. Redemption narratives demand transformation into something acceptable. Survival requires only honesty. Cage wasn't trying to regain his former status. He wasn't chasing validation from the institutions that had moved on. He was building a parallel existence, one where artistic risk no longer required permission. This recalibration extended beyond the screen. He simplified, reduced, let go of symbols that once defined success. The hunger to prove himself faded into something quieter, a confidence rooted not in applause, but endurance. Hollywood eventually noticed, not with fanfare, but curiosity. The question was no longer, what went wrong with Nicolas Cage? It became, why does this still work? Because beneath the chaos, the jokes, and the years of misinterpretation, there had always been a core truth. Cage was never chasing perfection. He was chasing experience. The raw, uncomfortable, human edge where performance stops being safe. Now, free from expectation, he finally had the one thing fame never gave him, agency, and with it, the ability to define his own terms, not as a redeemed icon, but as a working artist who survived when survival was the only victory left. Nicolas Cage's legacy was never going to be neat. Hollywood prefers arcs that rise, fall, and return with symmetry. His story refused that shape. He did not end as a redeemed idol, polished and approved. He ended as something far more unsettling, an artist who survived without asking permission to be understood. What the industry struggled with was not his talent, but his uncontainability. Cage never learned how to behave within the invisible rules of longevity. He didn't pace himself. He didn't protect the brand. He didn't optimize for perception. He followed instinct, even when instinct led him into chaos. For years, that refusal was punished. But time has a way of reordering narratives. When distance stripped away the jokes and the headlines, what remained was consistency of intent. Across masterpieces and misfires alike, Cage committed fully. He did not abandon performance when the spotlight turned hostile. He did not dilute himself to regain favor. He endured, publicly, awkwardly, honestly. That endurance is the key to his legacy. Not the Oscar, not the box office peaks, not even the collapse. His true mark lies in the proof that an artist can lose status, wealth, and approval, and still remain intact at the core, still working, still risking, still choosing expression over safety. Younger filmmakers now cite him not as a cautionary tale, but as a reference point, an example of what happens when someone refuses to separate identity from art, even when it costs everything else. His later work, once ignored, is being re-examined with fresh seriousness. Performances once mocked are being reinterpreted as deliberate provocations. Hollywood never fully knew what to do with Nicolas Cage, and that may be his greatest achievement. He exposed the system's limits, its impatience with contradiction, its discomfort with artists who cannot be domesticated. In the end, Cage did not reclaim the pedestal. He dismantled it, and standing outside of it, weathered, misunderstood, still working, he left behind something more durable than prestige, a reminder that fame is temporary, approval is fragile, but authenticity, even when chaotic, leaves a longer shadow. The screen fades, not with applause, but with persistence,